Welcome to the Healthy Compulsive Project podcast, where you can take a deep dive to explore the pitfalls and potential of the obsessive-compulsive personality, offering hope and help for perfectionists, workaholics, micromanagers, type A personality, and control freaks. Hello, everyone. Gary Trosclair here, psychotherapist, Jungian psychoanalyst, and author of the Healthy Compulsive Project book, blog, and podcast. We have a special treat for you guys today. I was interviewed by ultra-endurance athlete, coach, and podcaster Travis Macy for his podcast, The Travis Macy Show. Travis became interested in my work because we both work with people who have driven personalities. Today, I'll be sharing with you our discussion about this hard-charging and purposeful character and how best to use it. Having set records in some truly astounding endurance races, Travis knows about perseverance, resilience, and fortitude, all of which exist as potential in the obsessive-compulsive personality. We compare notes about competition, athletics, optimizing our energy, dealing with tension, and approaching our goals in a healthy way. We touch on developing a better relationship with the body, how mindfulness meditation actually helps, and how chronic urgency stress syndrome, CUSS, will drive us crazy if we don't hold what's most important foremost in our minds. You can find out all about Travis and his podcast at his website, travismacy.com. He's a great guy and a really healthy compulsive. I hope you enjoy our discussion as much as I did. So join me and Travis for episode 102 of the Healthy Compulsive Project podcast, an interview with ultra-endurance athlete and coach Travis Macy.
Very excited about today's guest, Gary Trosclair. I found about Gary through his podcast and his book. It's called The Healthy Compulsive Project, and it's all about taking the wheel of the driven personality. He's got a book of that title. He also has a podcast of that title. And I tell you what, I find his content to be both poignant and highly relevant. If you like this podcast, especially if you are like me, an endurance athlete, there's probably at least one part of your personality that has some of this a compulsive personality, this highly driven personality. It's great. This is something that can bring us results. It can bring us happiness. It can bring us achievement. It can help us get into those modes of living where we really feel alive, when we're pushing the limits, doing what we love. This driven personality also, as you likely know, it can be tough. It can be tough for ourselves. It can be potentially tough for the people around us. And it's something we've really got to learn to both foster and support and understand. That's what Gary's work is all about. Again, be sure to check out his podcast. You can find his blog, which is fantastic, easily digestible and very helpful articles. Those are at thehealthycompulsive.com. You can also find his website. He is a practicing psychotherapist, and his information for that is at garytrosclair.com. I really enjoyed talking with Gary. We were both present and engaged, and I learned a lot. I found him to be a healthy and supportive teacher and coach, and I'm super happy to share this conversation with you. Gary and I recorded this a number of months ago, so Gary, thanks for your patience in getting this out. I work with Palm Tree Pod production company for both the Travis Macy Show and Schemo Gold. And with both of these projects, I have to say the rate of episode release for either one sometimes is a little slower than I would like, simply based on my own funds for production. And, something like that, having a little patience, that is just one example of taking the wheel of the driven personality and, hey, being able to just slow things down a little bit. So without further ado, here it is, me and Gary Claire talking about the Healthy Compulsive Project and more. Again, please be sure to check out Gary online, thehealthycompulsive.com, and also GaryTrustClaire.com. And search the podcast player, just put in his name, you'll find his great podcast. Gary, welcome to the podcast. It is so great to have you here. Man, your work on the Healthy Compulsive Project really resonates with me personally. I've been enjoying your podcast. I've been enjoying your book, The Healthy Compulsive, and I'm so pumped to talk with you today. So thanks a lot for coming. And maybe to kick it off, I'd love to hear what is the Healthy Compulsive Project and bit about your own journey as what you call a driven person.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. A lot to talk about here today. So the Healthy Compulsive Project is a project. It's composed of a book, a blog, a podcast, and I'm just about to be on Instagram. Steep learning curve for me there. But in any case, the mission of the Healthy Compulsive Project is to help people make the best use of their driven nature, their perfectionism, their obsessive and compulsive tendencies. I mean, for most people, when you say obsessive or compulsive, they think, ooh, that's it's pathological. But part of my whole point is to take the pathology out of this so that people can make the best use of those things. Because frankly, a lot of this stuff is genetic. You're not going to take away some of this stuff. You can't make somebody stop being like that. But you can melt the ice of the unhealthy compulsive part and make it flow like water and make it be a much more healthy, fulfilling way of living. And so I knew when I titled it The Healthy Compulsive, people were going to think, well, wait, isn't that an oxymoron? Not to me. Because you can use these things in a very healthy way if you're conscious about it and if you're willing to face down certain insecurities and fears that might be underneath the unhealthy aspect of it. There is a diagnostic category. I'm not crazy about these diagnostic categories, but there's a diagnostic category which is not very well known. This is a category in the American Psychiatric Association's manual, and it's called the obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, also known as OCPD. And a lot of people think, oh, that's just OCD. No, they're very different. And part of my mission is to help people understand the difference because they require different treatments. Maybe I'm not sure we're going to go into the difference between the two too much right now, but OCD is an anxiety disorder, whereas OCPD is a personality disorder. Anxiety disorder, OCD, is when you have specific obsessions and specific compulsions, like I've got to wash my hands 50 times, I've got to check the gas, got to check the door. Whereas the personality disorder infects the entire personality with perfectionism, with rigidity, with the need for control. Very different personality styles, really, if you look at it. And so part of my mission is to help people see those differences so they get the treatment that they need. I mean, even a lot of clinicians don't know the difference or aren't even familiar with the diagnosis of CPD. So there is an aspect of it which I'm trying to inform the public about this condition because there's so much great potential in it. But you have to kind of understand it to get the great potential out of it.
Yeah.
So to say a little bit about how I got here, boy, lots to say there. But so I grew up, I was trained as a classical musician, a trumpet player. And it became clear early on that one of the things that could get in my way of how well I played was how tense I would get. as when I performed, when I practiced and all. And my teacher turned me on to a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, which is all about being able to let go and get your ego out of it. And this has had a huge impact on me. I've carried it with me for a long time. It's about not working too hard. In fact, there's a quote from it that I love, which is, "Trying hard is a questionable virtue." And that's something that I visit every day. So, I played music professionally till I was about 35 or 40. And so this is always something that I was working on psychologically, how not to get too rigid, to work too hard. And when I started training to become a therapist, actually, let me go one step forward. So I trained as a psychoanalyst, and then I started teaching psychopathology. Now, psychopathology is about different diagnoses. And one of the things I started to recognize is that a lot of people didn't know the difference between OCD and OCPD. But I also noticed that there are an awful lot of people that had these compulsive tendencies that could sure use help, especially in New York.
Yeah.
We've got millions of driven people coming here, And so I started to notice the pattern, but also notice that it wasn't really recognized and worked on in the either in research or in the clinical world very well. We actually have a real dearth of research on it, which is a shame.
Yeah.
So then I started thinking about this more, and the idea for a book, The Healthy Compulsive, came to mind. And it's and then I started the blog, and people really started reacting well to it. That they say, well, this helps me understand myself. I've never understood myself before. And
Yeah.
so there's the blog, and then the book, and then the podcast I started doing about a year and a half ago. And it's been very gratifying to hear from people that this helped to inform how they can live and how they can make the most of their personality rather than see it as pathological.
I think it's doing just that, Gary. And again, the title of the book, The Healthy Compulsive, Healing Obsessive Compulsive Personality Disorder, and I love this part, Taking the Wheel of the Driven Personality. A great metaphor there. And yes, I think that idea, the driven personality, many of us hear that and I think, oh, that's me. Or we'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about urgency in a bit. Like, man,
Mm-hmm.
if there's anything I'm wired for, it's urgency. And,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that can be helpful. And I've seen many ways in my life it has. It's been helpful as an athlete. I can imagine for musicians, other performers, hey, that could be great. And, boy, it's not always the best. Some of these things
Mm-hmm.
you get into family dynamics. Some of these things, they're not always attributes. So understanding it, and I would agree, Gary, that OCPD, amazingly, I hadn't heard of it until this year. And,
Mm-hmm.
for the listeners, I was in a session with my own therapist working through some of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, like, hey, man, what do you think? And whether there's a diagnosis or not, like, does
Mm-hmm.
that really matter? And the word
Yeah.
disorder, none of us really like that. But,
Mm-hmm.
he pulled out his little DSM, Cliff Notes or whatever. He's like,
Uh-huh.
hey, here's the
Uh-huh.
checklist for OCPD. What do you think of that? And I was like, wow, that describes a lot of my, to me, it feels very innate. And maybe that's our
Mm-hmm.
next question, Gary,
Yeah.
like nature versus nurture. What's where, if you had to put a percentage on either one, and maybe further into OCPD, what are some of those characteristics that people might experience again in this personality
Sure.
type?
Sure. So the origins of it are both environmental and genetic, and there are two other parts of it, which I'll get to in a minute. But we do have a fair amount of research which says that both OCD specifically has a significant genetic component. Now, studies might differ as to how much it is 20% or 70%, but let's say we split the difference and it's 50%. That's a big part of you that you can't just wish away or will away, So I think we
Yeah.
need to recognize that these are actually parts of our personality. And there's also a lot of research about the specific aspects of OCPD that are genetic. For instance, perfectionism. I've seen some therapists say, kill off your perfectionism. Well, I hope you won't do that. First of all, because it's part of you. Secondly, healthy perfectionism is a really good thing to have. If you use it in an adaptive way. Uh, One example that I used in one of my blogs was that I had to take my daughter for some surgery at one point. And thank God that surgeon was perfectionist. He told me, if I don't cut just right, I could cut a nerve in her face and her face would be paralyzed. That's scary. Luckily, this
Yeah.
guy was really on what he did, and he studied
Yep.
hard and he was perfectionistic. Thank God. So it's a good thing at
Yeah.
times. Other times it can drive us and everyone else around us crazy. So my point being there that there is a genetic component to both the diagnosis itself and individual components of it. So there's the genetic part, the environmental part. Oh man, there are lots of things that can happen in your family or in your environment that would cause it. But let's just take, for example, let's say that your family was very chaotic and you
Mm.
didn't know where the next meal was coming from. You would probably learn how to be compulsive to make sure everything gets done to make up for your parents. And I do have some clients like this. They're horrible family situations, and they learned that they had to be in control. And it served them well for a little while and to some degree, but over time, that doesn't work so well. This brings me to what I say is the third determinant of whether or not you get OCPD, which is what is the strategy you developed to deal with, for instance, a chaotic situation? For
Mm.
many people who are obsessive compulsive, what they developed was control, order, rigidity, perfectionism, all these characteristics. And it was part of a strategy to deal with a very difficult life situation. And part of what we need to do is to become aware of the strategy that we adopted and ask ourselves, is that strategy still working for us? Um, the last part of that is we need to, I think one of the things that gets in the way of our living as healthy compulsives is
Mm.
not keeping an eye on what's most important to us. I call it a disorder of priorities.
Mm.
Because what happens is you'll start with the strategy of being perfectionistic, controlling, and those become the end rather than the means to something.
Mm.
And that gets in the way of the things that are most important. With most of my patients early on, I'll say, so what are the 5 most important things to you in your life? And I'm surprised at how often they'll draw a blank. And I'll persist with this, of course, and they'll name the 5 most important things, and then we'll look at it. Okay, how does that jive with how you're actually living?
Mm.
Because the way they behave is that control is the most important thing to them, or perfection, and things like that. Those are the 4 things that I'd say they're most important that lead to an obsessive compulsive personality.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and I like that. Let's start with the values and think about how could these traits maybe support my values, but the trait itself, that control, that perfectionism, performance, like that's not the value itself.
Yes,
And it
exactly.
can, some environments. I'm thinking of my own experience. Some environments I've been in, they have brought out sort of those natural traits. I know for me,
Hmm.
one of them was school and being, okay, maybe there was a natural tendency to the urgency, the perfectionism, the, caring message from parents. All we care about is that you do your best. And to young Travis, that was like, okay, well, my best, like that means the best,
Uh-huh.
period.
Uh-huh.
And then in school, and this could be true, I imagine, maybe in music. I know for me it was in athletics. Okay, you work really hard, you focus on that perfectionism, and boom, you get the A, you get the gold star, you get the
Hmm.
next thing, and it spirals. I could
Hmm.
imagine the work environment can be very true for that as well. Do
Yeah.
you see, Gary? Are there what other environments are encouraging people to really build these traits, often without even knowing? Sometimes it may take a crisis, till we actually realize that these can be negative.
Hmm. I'm sorry. So the question is, what situations might bring out these
Yeah.
maladaptive traits? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Well, going back to a family situation, for instance, this might be obvious, but I think it's important to mention that if the parents themselves are very controlling,
Mm,
it's a trait that you learn to adopt. If the parents convey that the world is a dangerous place, you might feel that you have to be very controlling. Um, I think there are also a lot of rewards in our culture for being obsessive compulsive. You kind of need to do it in certain careers. I mean, in classical music, for instance, you kind of have to be perfectionistic, and it's a real shame. Um,
yeah.
Someone once told me that half the New York Philharmonic was taking beta blockers because the pressure's so great to be perfect there. It's
Mm.
unfortunate. So you might live or work in an environment that really does require that, and there's a real downside to it.
Yeah, yeah. How about I'm curious, your career as a musician, is that kind of what you were doing professionally and then you made a shift to your current work with the psychology room? Is that kind of how it worked for you?
Yes. So I got a doctorate in music and I was playing professionally. I played in orchestras. I played chamber music. I played a lot of avant garde music. Um, but I was also always fascinated by Carl Jung. Um,
Mm,
Carl Jung was an early 20th century Swiss psychiatrist who had been a colleague of Freud, and then they differed in certain ways. Freud's tendency was to say, you've got certain problems because there are problems with your parents, your environment, and I think that often is true. But what Jung says is that sometimes our symptoms are skewed attempts at healing or at growing or at individuation. And so
mm,
his tendency was to look at things less pathologically, less to say it's a disorder, and more to say, what is it that you're trying to work out? And how can we honor that? Because at the core of it, at the base of what that symptom might be, there might be something that's very compelling, compulsive, that could be really healthy if we get to the core of it. Um, One
mm,
of the characteristics in the DSM-5, the American Psychiatric Association's manual about OCPD, is that we lose the original intention of a task. So let's say
mm,
I want to go with my family and go out and have a picnic, but I get so rigid about being there on time and having everything doing it just right, I've lost the intention of it. And that's the whole
mm.
point about whole life that we lose. So going back to Jung, I think what he would say is that some of these traits that we might have had an original intention which we lost track of. And the idea is to try to look deeply at what is the original motivation and how can we honor that in our life rather than see it in some pathological way.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. One more question about that moment, Gary, when you made the transition from,
Mhm.
sort of music as profession, and I can imagine maybe as part of your identity into, sort of a next career phase. How did that go? And I'm
Mhm.
curious. Again, we have a lot of athlete listeners, especially for elite athletes. There can be a similar moment or
Mhm.
a sequence of time where almost there is an identity death, and it can be incredibly challenging. It can be, here's this thing where we had probably a range of control and and also love. It's really hard. And maybe you might say maybe there's a sense of sort of a second half of life,
Oh, sure.
beyond, that
Mhm.
can be, which it sounds to me, you're now doing something that's very outward focused on other
Mhm.
people, sort of, I think, align with Jung's idea. Tell us about that transition and how did that go for your driven personality?
Sure. Well, I started reading Jung when I was about 16 years old. So I've got a lot of it in me. And when I
Mhm.
started teaching trumpet at the college level, I found myself much more interested in my students' life than in their trumpet playing.
Mm,
Um, and so I started thinking, well, I'm so interested in psychology, maybe I should switch. So right around that time, I got a job playing in an orchestra in Portugal. So before I went, I got a huge stack of books by Jung and Jungian writers. And so I took these with me to Portugal. And I remember very distinctly, I was reading one of these books when I was on the train going to Lisbon for a rehearsal. And the author said, God knows we need more Jungian analysts. So I thought, oh, okay,
Mm,
that's my calling. So
yeah.
I came back to New York, went to social work school so I could get a license. And then I trained at the Jung Institute in New York, which is a very intense, very demanding program. When I was there, it took 7 years to do it. So
Wow.
it
And
was,
that was at what age, just for perspective?
I think I started the Jung Institute when I was about 40 years old.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And it's been very fulfilling. I did quit playing trumpet for a while I was in training because there just wasn't enough time to do it. But
Yep.
since then, I started playing again. I played a rock and soul band, which is just
Mm,
for fun. Uh,
yeah.
so I haven't had to leave music behind completely. It's still profoundly important to me.
Yeah, yeah. How and how does that feel now just for fun? Like, what a cool phrase. Does it feel different? Does it feel,
Oh, yeah.
again, back to that original compulsion, it can feel tight, the performance we must
Hmm.
achieve, right? You feel just looking at you, you're smiling talking about it. Like, how does it feel now?
Oh, it's much more fun. The difference between playing in a rock and soul band and playing in an orchestra is huge.
Yeah.
I remember after the first gig I played with this rock and soul band, I missed one note. And I told my wife, I
Mm,
was just devastated. I said, well, I think I should just quit. But then I got a letter from someone who went to the concert, so appreciative of it. So I said, okay, I won't give up. And I've
yeah.
realized that what I consider mistakes, the audience doesn't even notice,
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
little narcissistic of me. So yes, it's
Yeah.
completely different. I can dance around when I'm playing and it's so much fun.
Yeah. Good for
But all
you, man.
the classical training was very important in giving me the chops I need to be able to do that though.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. How can maybe someone's listening and they're thinking like, man, this thing I do, this thing I love, like maybe I've gone a little overboard, maybe I'm holding it too tightly. If
Hmm.
they want to turn that corner and it's more fun and it's more free and more playful, and ironically, sometimes the results are better because we're just doing the thing instead of worrying about the outcome. How can people do that?
I think it's really important to be aware of our motivation for what we do. A lot of
Mm,
people would start out, I guess, running these marathons that you guys run, the endurance things. To me, that's related to mastery. It feels so satisfying to be able to overcome our limits. But what can happen is that then we start to use this to prove that we are strong, um,
mm,
to prove lots of things about ourselves. We're hardworking, we're not lazy, whatever it is. And that's when we start to tense up. That's when it becomes a
yeah.
problem. So my suggestion for the person that you're the theoretical person you're mentioning is to slow down and say, wait, what do I want to do here? What's most important to me? Do I
Mm,
still enjoy biking? Do I still enjoy riding? Because I think for a lot of us, when we add this extra level on of having to prove ourselves,
mm,
that's where the extra tension comes in. One of the things I often demonstrate to my patients is, I see it's a podcast, people can't see this, but I'll describe it to the listeners. So I'm holding a pen loosely in my hand the way I would normally write. But
yep.
imagine me gripping this pen with a death grip.
Mm,
I'm not going to
yeah.
be able to write very well, and I won't be able to sustain that very well. So you can hold the pen or the tissue box or whatever it is um, with far less energy if you don't have to prove yourself. So
Mm,
I would want to explore, what's my motivation in doing this? Um, and if you can remove that need to prove, that I think shaves off about 30% of the tension and the stress that comes with whatever endeavors we're doing, whether it's athletics or music or being a therapist.
yeah, yeah. Oh man, I love that. I think that's a good, you hear often in the self-help world, like look out for the word should, don't should all over yourself. People probably
Hmm.
heard that. I like that idea, prove it. That could maybe be a red flag or maybe something
Hmm.
to notice. And I know I see that in athletes. Gary, I coach people who are, doing the ultra runs, like you said, the marathons or whatever. And sometimes people get a sense of like, I must finish 100-mile run, and there's a sense of proving something,
Mm-hmm.
and is it proving something to themselves, to their kids, proving,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm a real ultra runner. And I think you're right. I think that's a dangerous realm to go in, because, whether or not you finish the 100-mile run, like, it's not going to actually change anything. And there may be great
Mm-hmm.
reasons, I think, to pursue a great and uncertain goal like this.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's to prove something,
Mm-hmm.
let's, like you said, let's go back to the motivations. Why am I doing this?
Yeah. That reminds me. So I wanted to ask you, how do
Yeah.
you guys take off that extra layer of stress, of tension? Because if you guys are doing these endurance things, I would imagine you have to be extremely efficient in your use of your energy. How do you
Yeah.
guys work that out?
Yeah. Oh man, Gary, that's a great question. And I've kind of had a bit of a journey myself, maybe similar to your musical career, from elite athlete. And I can remember, whether it was high school or college or in my 20s, feeling like, this race, winning or getting on the podium, earning the prize money, like, it feels like life itself
Mm-hmm.
is dependent on it. And there's very much a tightness, and even with that tightness, sometimes I did perform quite well.
Mm-hmm.
How did I do it? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
there's some difference in, if you're talking about, elite musicians, every single little thing has to be perfect in the moment for a
Mm-hmm.
relatively short period of time. If you're talking about an ultra run that takes 5 hours or 12 hours or 20 hours, there's a lot more room for, you can go through a low period and kind of
Mm-hmm.
mess up, but then come back around. I wrote a book called The Ultra Mindset about 10 years ago, and that was like stories and principles from ultra endurance racing, that you could use for your running, but maybe also for life. And there was some ideas behind that as well. I would say, maybe now, again, having sort of turned that corner, or just I think matured myself, being at a different point. The advice I would give to athletes I coach is much different. I like that language of have a big goal, but hold it loosely.
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
really like. I'm into mantras, and I like those. I think they can be great. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say in these, it could be 2 a.m. You're suffering, like, no matter what, it's going to be really, really hard, and you're also running low on energy, and it's hard to think straight. So if you can have some very tangible things to come back to, it could be a mantra, it could be one piece of advice I give to, clients who are doing these long races is carry a note card with you, and ahead of time, put some stuff on that card. And it's going
Mm-hmm.
to vary from person to person. Maybe it's the names of your kids. Maybe it's, a quote from Jung or whoever. Maybe it's a
Mm-hmm.
poem, like whatever truly, back to your point of motivation, what gets you to that thing. Maybe it's pictures of your kids,
Mm-hmm.
or your spouse, or, something like that, something you can touch there in your pocket or pull out
Mm-hmm.
and look at it. And I think that can be really helpful, to use in the moment. And then another strategy I would recommend, Gary, and I think this is pervasive culturally, is let's try to limit comparison, because
Mm-hmm.
I think comparison, especially in the age of social media, and especially for athletes in the age of, like you said, Instagram, it could be a great tool, but man, that could be a dangerous thing, because you're scrolling through, you're looking at someone else's highlight reel.
Mm-hmm.
These runners and athletes, they're looking at, oh, so and so did this, or, there's another one called Strava, Gary, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
sort of like Instagram, but your workouts, your training gets
Ah,
posted on there. And it
yeah.
is, it's both, it's cool, it's fun. I use it. It's neat because you
Mm-hmm.
see, oh, I just ran this route and now I'm, the 10th fastest time, or I got the record, or, so there can be a competitive comparison sort of piece. It can be a great way to connect with people. And man, that can be dangerous, because if you're scrolling through that and all you're doing is comparing, that's really dangerous. And that's a big hole, I think, for a lot of athletes. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for a lot of aging athletes, it becomes super hard, because the
Yeah.
natural comparison is to ourselves. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago, my time was whatever. 10 years ago, I weighed this amount or I could push this much power on the bike. That's a dangerous one for sure.
Yeah, I think that can happen to therapists too. The other therapist must be getting it right. I must be getting it wrong. Yeah. But one thing I found
That's
helpful
interesting.
is, we don't see each other working usually. So
Yeah.
you imagine they're
Yep.
doing it better than you. But anyway, one of the things I found very helpful on so many levels, or as a musician or as a therapist, is to monitor the tension in my body. For me,
Yes. Say
my
more.
shoulders go up, and
Yep.
it
Yep.
was such so helpful when I realized, oh, that means I'm getting tense. It might be obvious, but the helpful thing is that if I lower my shoulders, my mind releases with them, because the
Mm.
mind follows the body at times too. Certainly the body follows the mind, but the mind follows the body. And if you can see where your tension, your compulsiveness, your drivenness comes into the body, you can change the body and change the mind.
I love it. Yeah. Meditation. I just listened to one of your podcasts about mindfulness meditation, and
Mm-hmm.
Gary, I agree. I love it, man. It makes me feel so good. And I have been,
Mm-hmm.
as I write programming for athletes, I'm including recommendations to
Mm-hmm.
meditate because I think not only is it good for your health, it makes you feel. I think this is a great athletic skill and tool.
Mm-hmm.
Say more about meditation. How can that be helpful?
Okay. Um, One level is that you start to memorize the feelings that you have when you meditate, and you can call on them when you're outside of meditation. Uh,
Mm.
so, for instance, the meditation that I practice is based on the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and he has this. It's sort of they're prompts, which are uh, uh, deep, slow, calm, ease, smile, release. And you meditate with those enough, you can call on those when you're outside of meditation and it can help you. But the other, perhaps more important thing is that in meditation, we let everything in and we observe it and we sit with it. One of the biggest problems for all of us psychologically is that there's certain feelings that we try to avoid, either consciously or unconsciously. And the
Mm.
avoidance makes it far worse. And in
Mm.
meditation, we systematically let all the feelings in, let them in the front door, and you just let it go out the back door. Now, it's not always so simple. I want to admit that, but it's a psychological skill which helps us to deal with our feelings more effectively.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, I love it. Any other specific somatic techniques that you either work through with patients or that you recommend people do on their own?
Yeah, I think some people have a hard time starting with meditation if they're too restless or there's something disturbing about the silence. Then I
Yep.
recommend that they do progressive muscle relaxation, which
Mm.
is where you start at the top or the bottom of the body and you systematically tense and release each part of the body. And man, you do that for 15 minutes and you're going to be much more relaxed. And here again,
Yep.
you're learning a skill that you take with you outside of meditation.
Hey folks, want to tell you real quick about the one supplement that me and my dad Mace take every day for lifelong brain health. This is Relevate by NeuroReserve. You can check out neuroreserve.com/Travis Macy for 15% off. Relevate, one soft gel and 2 capsules daily. Again, it's a supplement that provides core dietary nutrients for lifelong brain health. Check out neuroreserve.com/Travis Macy for 15% off Relevate.
Switching topic a little bit, you've got a great podcast, Gary, about an acronym I think you created, CUSS, CUSS, Chronic Urgency Stress Syndrome. And when I saw that title, I was like, boy, if there's one word, again, to just sort of, define my natural wiring, it's urgency,
Yeah.
and again, it can be good. It can be in the positive. This can be an excitement and enthusiasm, an
Mm-hmm.
energy that can be shared with people.
Mm-hmm.
And there can be a downside. So what's
Yeah.
going on with CUSS?
Yeah. Okay. One way to tell the difference between whether it's maladaptive urgency or adaptive urgency is
Mm,
to know whether you're moving towards something or away from something. Now,
mm,
this is approach motivation as opposed to avoidance motivation. If you slow down enough to say, okay, is there something that I really want to move toward? Like, I want to write this new song, and man, I had an idea, and I really want to get to it right away. That's approach motivation. On the other hand, if you're thinking, oh God, what if I don't have a new song for my reel? I'm going to feel terrible. I've got to do this. That is avoidance motivation, and it might make
mm.
you feel urgent, like, okay, I'll get this done, but it's more because you're afraid of shame or embarrassment or feeling bad about yourself.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, I like that. And what about, let's say, urgency within the, family dynamic? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that can be a challenge. We feel, an urgency, whether it's our own goals to get something done, like you said, to have the perfect picnic. We have a plan in our mind of here's how the weekend is going to go,
Mm-hmm.
and then it changes, and that's just, man, anyone who's a parent, like, like that is life. It
Mm-hmm.
forces you to be more flexible, pliable, like you said, go like water.
Mm-hmm.
But it can still be really hard. And it can be, even if we know I need to be more flexible, it can be extremely unsettling,
Mm-hmm.
to accept that new plan.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do we do? How do we how do we handle that?
Here again, I want to emphasize the importance of knowing what's important. So,
Mm,
as a parent, you know that getting a good education for your child is important. Um, but you also know that their self-esteem, knowing that they are loved, having a sense of security, of calmness is important. So it's 7:59. You've got to get out the house to get them to school on time. And you're wondering, how much do I push this? Well, what's going to be the consequence if I get tough with my son because of this? And
mm.
how bad is the consequence if he is 5 minutes late getting in the door? What's really most important here? And constantly keeping that list of what's truly important can help you sometimes out of these difficult situations where you feel the pressure. I've got to get this done right now. Well, I don't know. Do you have to? Education is important, but psychology, self-esteem, uh, calm is probably more important than that particular day of getting to school on time.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. And I can imagine in the heat of the moment, if our nervous system is ramped, if we're, feeling frozen or entangled, sometimes a nice simple mantras can be good. And what's
Mm-hmm.
important? I like that. That's a good
Yeah.
one to go
Mm-hmm.
back to.
Mm-hmm.
If we ask ourselves what's important, even in the heat of the moment, we
Mm-hmm.
may be able to find that separation.
Yeah.
Yeah. How decision making, Gary? You write about this, a fork in the road.
Mm-hmm.
We're recording right now. All federal employees have gotten a legendary email. Fork in the road. They got to
Uh-huh.
decide. No matter how we feel about that decision, we reach these forks, right? We have to
Mm-hmm.
decide stuff. That's been a challenge for me at times, and I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a perfectionism component of like neither option is perfect, or also a perfectionism component of like, I am sure I can find some way to have my cake and eat it too.
Mm-hmm.
And if I look back, I've figured out ways in life to do that when it seemed impossible. So
Mm-hmm.
by golly, now I can do it again. That's kind of one voice. Probably the voice of wisdom says like, no, really. Sometimes you just have to decide, and that
Yeah.
means
Uh-huh.
choosing one thing and not the other. What's your advice on decision making?
I think to realize that two things come to mind so far. One is that we can't always know in advance how we're going to feel a mile down the road. We
Mm.
think we're going to know the way we have to have our lives, and it's got to be like that, or I'll be completely unhappy. Um, we're very bad at doing that. So to think that you have to get it right is inaccurate, because that might not actually be the right thing once you get there. The
Yeah.
other thing is to remember that it's also what you make of it once you get there. Like
Mm.
people will drive themselves crazy trying to decide who they're going to marry. Now, you do need to be circumspect about that and thoughtful and cautious. But for some people, and some people call this ROCD, relationship OCD, also known as
Mm.
FOBO, fear of better options.
Okay.
You can
I
drive
haven't heard
yourself
that. Yeah.
crazy with that.
Yep.
I think it actually has a lot more to do with, do both of you want to make a good marriage? It's what you do with it
Mm.
once you get there. Now, obviously, you got to have enough, going for the two of you together to make it work out. But some people get so caught up in thinking, I have to get this decision absolutely perfectly, rather than I can make this marriage work. Or,
Mm.
whatever decisions they are, like, am I going to have the vanilla or the chocolate? Um, you can decide to enjoy whichever one you have, It doesn't have to be a certain way. So I think to recognize the rigidity inherent in that, to realize that we can be flexible, um, and we don't have to have it a particular way.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, I like that, and that's really really wise. And perfect is the enemy of good, and especially
Yes. Mhm.
in a relationship, right? None of us are the perfect partner, and the perfect partner doesn't exist.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Right.
I think you're what was it called? Phobo, fear of better
FOBO.
options.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Or grass is greener.
Yeah.
Type of outlook. Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that.
The metaphor that I use sometimes with people is, if you're going to be climbing a mountain and you're at a fork, you take this trail or that trail, there are probably going to be switchbacks later on to get you to the top of the mountain. There's not just one way to get there.
Yeah, yeah, I like that, and I think that's a great point. What's that called? Affective prediction or something? Where we can't predict. It's
Yeah.
been
Right.
showed. We think we can predict the future, but we can't.
Right.
We don't have a crystal ball, and by
Mhm.
necessity, sometimes we make the wrong choice, or we make a choice, and that's kind of what it was.
Yeah. Um, I think what you're referring to is Dan Gilbert's work,
Yep.
a Harvard psychologist. He wrote a book called Stumbling Onto Happiness. The point being that we
Mm.
don't get ourselves there through always through exact careful planning, but
Yeah.
we get there partially by wanting to be happy rather than planning it all out.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Um, How about for family and friends? So we've been talking mostly in, I am the person who's kind of, grappling through the OCPD, the driven personality. The people may be listening to this and you're thinking, wow, this really reminds me of my friend, my
Hmm.
spouse.
Hmm.
My child. What should those people know? How can we support the people we care about
Hmm.
who maybe grapple with some of these tendencies, strengths and or
Sure.
weaknesses.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to have to do a slight detour before I answer your question.
Okay.
One of the things I realized after I wrote the book, The Healthy Compulsive, is that there are different types of compulsives.
Mm, This is
If you
great. I got the chart right here because I wanted
Okay,
to talk
good.
about these.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So at the top of the circle, we have the teacher mentor. That's the positive aspect of it. But they can also become bullies, bosses, and they can become very domineering. This is the most
Mm,
difficult type of compulsive to live with. I'll come back to this when I answer your question. Second type of compulsive is the doer worker. They can become
hmm
workaholics, but they can be very productive. Third type, and this is like at the bottom of the circle, is people who can be servers and they can be friends. At the worst,
Yep.
they become people pleasers and they lose what they have to offer because they're so worried about what other people want. And
Mm.
to the left side of the circle are the thinker planners, which can be great, but they can become obsessive and perfectionistic and procrastinate a lot.
Yep.
Now, ideally, we integrate the better parts of all four of those, and that's how you get to be a healthy compulsive. But
Mm.
going back to this question about, if you're living with someone who has OCPD, it can be extremely difficult, especially if it's a domineering type. I have seen domineering types change once they realized that they were hurting their partner.
Mm.
And it's, it might take 10 or 15 years to get there, unfortunately, but that's the one that can be very difficult, but they can change. The three things I would recommend that if you decided that you do want to stay partnered with them, one is to try to appreciate what they do have to offer and recognize that even if there are worse moments, they are trying to do the right thing, as crazy as it
Mm.
seems. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's a mindset about how you think and how you look underneath at what their motivation for what they're doing. Now, we know that the path to hell is paved with good intentions, but it can also help you not to take it personally when they start telling you what to do, to remember that they're actually trying to help. So that's the first part, the mindset. Second part is communication, has a lot to do with I statements, which is saying, do you realize how that makes me feel? I am very hurt by what you said. You said that I
Mm.
look bad in that dress. That's very hurtful to me. And I want you to know that I can't keep going on if you're going to boss me around like that. So it's communicating in a way from what the impact it is that has on you. The third part for someone who's living with someone who has OCPD is self-care. If the person with OCPD is not treating you well, if they're abusing you, that's not acceptable. Uh,
Yep.
you need to get at least get support or leave. I mean, I can't tell people not to leave a marriage, but I don't want to recommend that anyone tolerate abuse. However,
Yep.
within that, let's forget about the abuse for a moment. Let's just say there are important things for the non-OCPD partner to do to take care of themselves. They need to have a support network, ideally a therapist, join a support group. But also within that, and this might be hard for some people to hear, but I say it out of empathy and concern, is that the non-OCPT partner also has to ask themselves, am I getting anything out of this? If
Mm.
their partner is the one that takes care of everything, that plans everything, that does the accounting, they fix the house, they fix the car, is there something you get out of that? Um, or is there something that you get out of being the one that is hurt by them? There is a danger in a victim mentality.
Mm.
I have 3 different posts on my blog about um, the oppressor, the victim, and the rescuer. What often happens in OCPD relationships is um, the compulsive person goes into the relationship thinking that they're going to be a rescuer, and
Mm.
then the other person, but then they get so adamant in their rescuer that they become an oppressor. They can become
Mm.
domineering, and then
Yep.
you've got the other person that feels like a victim, and those roles get shifted around. Um,
Yeah.
but point being to try to understand if there's any role that you have in this empathically. Understand that for yourself empathically, because the way I understand couples is that they are a system that functions together, and rarely is one person the only one that has any role in this. It has a
Mhm.
lot more to do with fit. Um,
Mm.
there are some relatively compulsive partners that fit fine with one person, but not with another.
Yep.
Um, so it's not just objectively the compulsive person is all wrong. At the same time, again, I don't want anyone to be abused.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, that's really helpful, Gary. Thank you. And again, this diagram of the types of the healthy compulsive, Gary, I love it because again, you identify these specific categories and you say, again, for example, with the teacher leader, in on the good side can be guiding and authoritative, or taken too far is controlling
Mm-hmm.
and over authoritative. So there's ups and downs to each of these, and I think we can see some of these traits. For example, hey, maybe this is a great thing to pull out in the professional environment,
Mm-hmm.
but at home with my partner and my kids, I need to dial it back so that I'm not coming across as this analytic lecturer or something.
Exactly.
Um,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
yeah, which is not, all this is easier said than done, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, how about it, helping someone, maybe they have some of these traits, these OCPD, it seems to align with what we're seeing with someone. We can see maybe how it's holding them back or creating challenges within a family. Is it typically hard? I mean, I guess I could say it's probably hard for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they've achieved highly, if they think, oh,
Mm-hmm.
my attention to detail and all this, like that's why I'm so damn good, in
Mm-hmm.
X.
Mm-hmm.
It may be hard for that person to accept, like, hey, here's this, quote, disorder or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that may be part of me. What are some steps in that process?
Yeah, you're pointing out one of the defining characteristics of the most unhealthy end of the compulsive spectrum, which is that it's called ego syntonic. That is that they think the
Mm,
way they're living is ideal, and this is the way everyone should live. And so it's
yeah.
hard for them, as you point out, because they've probably had some success. It's hard to believe that they should live any way other than that. So I think some of the things to keep in mind are to remember that underneath the bluster and the control of that person, they desperately want to feel like they are a good person. That's what motivates so much of this, is an insecurity that they are morally good. And so
Mm,
if you can find a way to suggest, for instance, that they go to therapy or read this book, that it's not because you're not good, it's because you're too good. It's not
mm,
because you're
mm.
weak, it's because you're too strong.
Yeah.
And again, the point, look at the effect that it has on both of us. It's when you start telling me how to do every little thing, it makes me feel very bad about myself. It feels like I'm in a prison. It feels like I'm being controlled. And I know you don't want me to feel that way. I know you're trying to do the right thing. Um, and also to point out that, I don't think it's helping you either, because um, you're very stressed. Your blood pressure is up. Um, and you're not allowing yourself to do the things that you really want to do. Every time we go on vacation, you get upset because it's not the perfect vacation. And so
Mm.
I'm really concerned for you that you're not enjoying your life.
Yeah, yeah. That's really good. And again, people check out Gary's podcast, The Healthy Compulsive, because one thing I love about it, Gary, is you do sort of role plays like that. Making up people's names. But here's Tim, so and so, and here's
Hmm.
his narrative, and it's a great way to. It helps us relate to people because we see like these are people, and generally we're all trying our best. Even the domineering person, they're trying their best to
Hmm.
be good,
Hmm.
but when we see your examples, I think that's it's powerful. So keep it up with those. They're really good. They're
Okay,
entertaining too.
good.
Yeah, a
Thanks for the
lot of this.
encouragement.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I no, I really do like it. A lot
Hmm.
of this is it's about anxiety, isn't it? Like mitigating anxiety. This anxiety that
Hmm.
that I'm not good enough, that I'm not, I don't know, whatever I need to have the plan and it needs to go that way or whatever. To say more about that, and maybe are there separate anxiety medication, whether it's medication, exercise, meditation,
Hmm.
decreasing anxiety as a whole, is that going to maybe help some of these behaviors?
Yeah. Yeah, some early writers on the obsessive compulsive personality say it's all anxiety. It's a big part of it. I'll get to that in a moment, but it's the collision between a particular personality type, which is by nature meticulous and perfectionistic, and then you add any insecurities to that, they're going to use the hammer they've got and just pound away. So it's not just anxiety; it's anxiety along with a particular set of skills that one's born with. Okay, but about anxiety, yes, I think that there are many different types of insecurity that will lead someone to the unhealthy end of the compulsive spectrum. I think one is a fear that they are not morally good. Another one is that they are not lovable. Another one is that they might be lazy. And so they work really hard to compensate for these insecurities. Some people might say that underneath the fear of not being good is the fear of not being lovable. It's hard to tell, but what I do know is that many people experience it as if I'm not good, that I can't tolerate that, or if I'm not strong, or if I'm not capable. That those are so important. So I think the idea is just to understand what some of those insecurities are that drive you. Slow down, question them. Do I really am I really that bad? Do I really need to prove myself? And where do these ideas come from? I don't like to reduce everything to family history, but it is important to know what things happened in our family that made us adopt these less than effective strategies. We don't want anybody to get stuck there in family history or even trauma, but understand how we adapted to those difficulties, question the strategy, and see if there's a better way to use them. So the point being is that hopefully that these can start to lower anxiety. But yes, certainly exercise. We've got a fair amount of research that says exercise is at least as effective as some medications. Definitely meditation. I think journaling is a really good place to work these things out. I mean, at this point in life, my journal is my therapist, because that's where I go to work things out after having tons of therapy myself. So meditation, exercise, of course, therapy, and educating ourselves through reading some of these books.
Cool. I like it. How about archetypes? You talk in your book and the podcast, and I like this, especially for those of us who are interested in mythology or the Joseph Campbell stuff. Or I think this probably connects to Jung in many ways. What are some of the archetypes maybe that connect with the OCPD personality type? You ask in one of your podcasts, I think it was something like, am I compulsively heroic or heroically compulsive? Say more about that. I got a kick out of that, and I thought it was pretty good. It maybe goes back to the motivation thing.
Well, first, let me say that archetypes are universal potentials for certain experiences. So you've experienced the father archetype. I'm sure as soon as you saw that baby, that father archetype kicked in. So it's a potential behavioral and emotional experience that can either be very helpful to us or it can drag us down into a rut. So, for instance, let's take the hero archetype. When we get into hero mode, we will ourselves to overcome challenges. And that can be very helpful. But if you start willing yourself to stay up all night, every night, studying or working heroically, you will crash eventually. So the hero archetype is one that can really motivate us and get us through difficult things. We engender all of our strength when we do that. But if you do that habitually, then you become a compulsive hero rather than a heroic compulsive. Some other archetypes that I've mentioned are the fool. The fool is a very good compensatory archetype for people who are very rational and strict with themselves, because the fool is out there enjoying life. He doesn't plan. He savors things. He loves nature. So it's a very inspiring archetype that we can definitely learn from. Trying to think what other archetypes I know I've written about. Well, okay, let me take another archetype.
I think you talked about the saint, maybe.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That can become, again, it can be very inspiring, or it can
Yeah.
get you into a rut. In that blog and that podcast, I use Mother Teresa as an example. There is a great podcast series about what it was actually like in Mother Teresa's order, in which suffering became primary. And a lot of people suffered more than they had to. And I think that's
Mm,
because the archetype of the saint kicked in a very destructive way.
mm,
Um, so again, these things are potentially healthy, unhealthy. Let me take another one. Like there's the archetype of the persona, which is the mask that we all wear. We have to have some mask to present to the world to get away, to get along in the world. And we
yeah.
especially need it at work. We can't just say whatever we want to say or do whatever we want to do. We need to present ourselves in a professional way. But if you don't take off that mask when you get home, or if you
Mm,
believe that mask is who you are, or the mask is too thick, or if that mask is deceptive and not congruent with who you are, those all create problems that you're going to feel conflict and anxiety inside because how you present yourself is not the same as what you feel inside. So that's another archetype that I
mm.
think it helps to understand we all have, but we want to use mindfully.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. And I think you had a whole podcast on that, Gary, about how self-control and inhibited expression
Right.
hurt relationships. And I think you're right on. We need to be ourselves. And I love that being the fool. And that's great for someone,
Hmm.
I can imagine the person who like their whole life they've thought of like being serious, being regimented, that is fun. And
Hmm.
maybe I'm not saying it's not fun to be serious because
Hmm.
there can be a joy in that, but like try on the fool, try just winging it,
Yeah.
try,
Uh-huh.
even if it's acting at first, be as water, go as a river, let that ice melt. You might find that it's kind of cool, huh?
Yeah. Well, personal confession here. Uh, so in the past, when I do workshops or presentations or podcasts, I would prepare. I mean, that was one of my strategies in life, especially
Yeah.
classical musician. You prepare, prepare, prepare.
Yeah.
And I decided for this podcast, I was not going to prepare at all. I, I invoked the archetype of the fool, and hopefully it's
Yeah.
going okay.
It's going
Uh,
great, man. You're nailing it. You show up and you just be yourself. you know, I think it's good for you. I think that's awesome. Speaking of, how about clinging to these what you call sacred cows of identity and worth?
Mhm.
And I'm thinking of identity. I know for me as an athlete, there were a lot of points like, this racing and stuff. Like it's not something I do. Like I am an athlete, and especially
Mhm.
if you're making money, I am a pro athlete. I am an elite athlete. That
Mhm.
becomes just wrapped in the identity. And then if and when
Mhm.
it goes away or it changes, you're like, who the hell am I? I can
Yeah.
imagine
Mhm.
for a musician, for many, many people professionally, this is who I am. Well,
Mhm.
who are you outside of that business title? Why do we cling to these? How can we maybe release them or maybe have a little distance?
Mhm.
And why might that bring some freedom?
Mhm. Well, I think you've outlined it well already. That identity is something that we start to rely on to feel secure. But the problem is that these identities are often very limited. If I only think
Mm,
of myself as a therapist, that's going to put so much pressure on me that
yeah.
it's going to be harder to relax into the work and do my best work if that's who I am. Um, so I think it's an important skill, I think, to be able to let go of the identity for at least a little while, if not overall, because it just puts too much pressure on it.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
does have this feeling of being sacred, like it's something I can't touch. I can't even consider
Yes.
letting go of that. And that's a
Yeah.
sort of rigidity that can kick in when we feel insecure because it feels like this identity has saved me. This is
Mm.
what's gotten me through life. Um, but it's gotten you through in a very limited way.
Interesting. Yeah. I like that, going back to that motivation. I found myself recently asking Gary, when I'm going out and I'm doing these things I've done forever, at times have become too much of my identity, but running, biking, skiing uphill, I was doing it this morning, and I'll ask myself, like, am I at the root? Am I doing this just because it's what I've always done, and
Hmm.
I'm afraid of like something else, some expansiveness, or like, am I doing it because I just love it? Like, I like being outside. It feels good. I connect with nature. I truly enjoy it. Mostly, I think my answer is the latter. And for me,
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
feels like a good answer.
Hmm.
But I'm glad I'm asking that, because sometimes we do just, right? We just keep doing it because it's like, oh, this is how I've done things. This is who I am. Or maybe it's more, this is who I think I am. And we don't even,
Yeah.
consider other options.
Yeah. I think related to that, if we get very simplistic about life, there's joy and there's meaning. Some
Mm,
things I'll do just for the pure pleasure of it, just because they're joyful. And there are other things that I'll do because they have meaning. And I might not
mm,
enjoy it, but
yeah.
it has great meaning for me and it's satisfying and fulfilling in that way.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, nice. I like that, and that is, many phases of life. If we have that bigger commitment, let's say parenting, for example, like there are a lot of things that will not be joyful, but
Yeah.
hopefully will have that meaning. And
Yes.
maybe that leads us sort of to the final question on my list, Gary. Like, the driven personality over time as we age.
Hmm.
I think for some people they can find a bit of release, a bit
Hmm.
of more freedom, a bit of sometimes, like, man, we just encounter stuff and like we realize life is way more out of my control
Oh,
than
yeah.
I thought it
Hmm.
was, with illness, with loss, with death,
Hmm.
with I'm in the midst of this, my dad's Alzheimer's journey, and like, man, I've learned,
Hmm.
like, things are out of your control. You can do a lot
Hmm.
of stuff right and be a good person. And like, things may get hard. And it's been incredibly challenging, but also expansive, to embrace and be okay with that uncertainty. I
Hmm.
also see, and you've written about this on the other hand, sometimes that rigidity can, become more constricting. People are more stuck in
Hmm.
in their patterns of being, acting, behaving. I don't know. What are you seeing, and how do we hopefully make things, better over time?
Yeah. It's a good question. Um, Jung talked a lot about the second half of life having a very different attitude,
Mm,
one in which I think we're open to those things which are out of our control. First half of life, we're building a kingdom. We get our job, we do whatever, might mean buying the house, might mean having a family, or whatever it is. But after we build our kingdom, then we start to realize that there's a lot of stuff that we can't control. Coming to
mm,
terms with that, um, and I'm going to use this term very loosely, having a spiritual attitude towards it, which is that it's less about accomplishing and achieving in the outside world necessarily, but more about fulfilling on the inside and my personal individuation, becoming whole, becoming myself as much as I can. That's more within my control than doing the things that I might do on the outside for achievement. And I think you're right that you alluded to this, that as I observe it, as people grow older, they can go one way or the other with this. That is that
mm.
they can retire and start to loosen up and enjoy life and do the things that they enjoy, or they can get more and more and more rigid over time, which is profoundly sad to me because it doesn't have to be that way. And that's part of
Yep.
what the healthy compulsive is about, because this personality style can can be so rewarding, so fulfilling, so productive for us
Mm,
and the people around us. Uh, a
yeah.
lot of the great stuff that's been done in life, in the world, has been done by people that were compulsive.
Yeah.
But a lot of the worst things that have been done have also been done with people that are compulsive. So
Yeah.
there's that fulcrum. And so part of this project is to help tilt the thing in a healthy way, so that a lot of these people with potential to do good or bad, they're going to end up doing good rather than bad. It's my hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Well, Gary, I think you're doing good, man. Like I said, check it out, listeners. The Healthy Compulsive podcast where you'll find they're nice little snippets, digestible, 10, 20 minutes, a lot of this stuff we've been talking about. The book as well, The Healthy Compulsive, Healing Obsessive-Compulsive Personality Disorder, and Taking the Wheel of the Driven Personality. And Gary, I love that part, taking the wheel, because it's a positive suggestion. And that is something like, hey, maybe you're thinking of someone when you hear that title. Is setting this book down, taking the wheel, like that's all, the driven person, like, hell yeah, I want to take the wheel. And so it's good, but it's also enlightening. Gary, the blog is great. Like you said, Instagram soon. What is that going to be at The Healthy Compulsive? Do you know, or?
I'm very new to Instagram, so I think it's at _healthy_compulsive. There's no content there yet, but coming soon, hopefully within a week or two.
Okay, great. Well, by the time this podcast goes out, that'll be up there, so we'll get it linked. Anywhere else people should look for you, Gary, and anything else you want to share before we part ways? This has been great. I'm going to listen to this myself, because this stuff, it's so relevant. It's really helpful. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll just mention one thing, that there is a support group on Facebook for OCPD. It's very active, a lot of support there. They also have a group that meets like every other week there. So if there are people that some of these things resonate with, you might look into that. You don't have to meet the full criteria for the diagnostic. For diagnosis, that doesn't matter. But if you find yourself perfectionistic, driven, you might get something out of that. So it's just a resource for people to help themselves with.
Great. Well, sounds good. Thanks again, Gary, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, folks, thanks as always for listening. You can support this podcast by sharing it with a friend, by liking, rating, reviewing, subscribing. All of that helps. Please be sure to check out Mr. Trusclair's stuff. If you like this podcast, I think you'll really like his blog and his own podcast. Search his name online, go to thehealthycompulsive.com, go to GaryTrusclair.com, or right here in the podcast player you're in, just type in Gary's name. You will find his podcast, and it's great. They're just short, digestible, highly targeted, highly scientific, and highly actionable. It's really good stuff. All right, folks, have a good one. We will catch you next time on The Travis Macy Show.